Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marvin, and in this video I'm going to explain to you your final research paper. So at this point in the semester we have finished all of the discussion boards. You're probably just putting your finishing touches on essay number 3, and all that remains is your grand finale, which is the research paper assignment. So before we get into the particulars, I want to reiterate what I've said before, which is that even though this is the only assignment that is called the research paper, capital R, capital P, keep in mind that you've been doing research all semester because you've been reading things, writing about things, discussing things, thinking critically about things, trying to figure out how different authors' ideas fit together and how they interact with your own ideas, and that's really all research is. So for this last essay, you're just going to be doing that on the biggest scale yet. Okay, so I've got the assignment sheet open here on the left. As per usual, this happens to be the assignment sheet for section DL2, but both of my online sections of English 101 are doing the same assignment. So, of course, since this is your last essay, there are no final exams, no midterm exams, you're very welcome. So this is your last paper, and it's going to be between 1,750 and 2,250 words. So that's about 7 to 9 pages at 250 words per page, 12-point times New Roman double-spaced, etc. The number of sources that you're going to use this time around are between 4 and 6, so at least 4 sources, probably no more than 6. All of those sources are going to come from outside of our textbook and outside of the things we've talked about in class. So we started to do this with the Synthesis Plus paper with essay number 3, where you started to bring in sources of your own. This time you're going to find all of the sources on your own. And that's because you're going to have the greatest freedom when it comes to topic. There's going to be an annotated bibliography, which you may have done from previous classes, but I will explain how to do those momentarily. There's going to be a rough draft of the annotated bibliography due by Thursday, the 3rd of May. And again, I'll talk about that in a little while. Rough draft for the essay is going to be due on Tuesday the 8th by the end of the day, 11:59 p.m. Peer reviews, as usual, are due a couple of days later at the end of the day on Thursday the 10th, and the final draft will be due on Sunday the 13th by 11:59 p.m., and then you are done. So, topics. Throughout the semester, we have discussed, read, and written about the ideas of others and how those ideas interact with our own about the world. We have paid particular attention to the power of language and the rhetorical decisions every writer must face to express their ideas clearly, concisely, and with conviction. For your final paper, you will focus on the smallest building block of language that allows ideas to be shared, which is the word. So, your assignment is to, in a coherent, well-written research paper, craft an argument about a word of your choice. You may choose any word you like as long as you can effectively research and argue about it. I'm also going to say at this point that you may choose a popular phrase if you are so inclined. So, for example, Black Lives Matter. Fake news, right? All of these things are phrases that you could choose to make as the basis of your research paper, in addition to any word that you can think of. So again, the key here is to keep in mind that you do have to make an argument, a thesis-driven argument about your word. So do not mistake the research paper to be a report where you just tell me a bunch of things of what you learned about your word. What you learned about your word will be part of your essay for sure, but you're still going to be synthesizing all this information and trying to come up with an argument about your word in terms of what it means in 2018, what is its role in society, how has its meaning changed over time, and how should we think about this word given where we are as a culture and as a society. You must use the Oxford English Dictionary in your paper, and you must find 4 to 6 additional sources to increase your expertise about the word and help you make your argument. So, the Oxford English Dictionary is an etymological dictionary. So, you're going to hear the word etymology quite a bit. For this assignment, etymology means the history, the study of the history of language. The Oxford English Dictionary is an etymological dictionary, which means it has the history of most words in the English language. It is a very large dictionary. It is 12 volumes. So, point A, do not mistake any Oxford dictionary with the Oxford English Dictionary. Oxford publishes many different kinds of dictionaries. The Oxford English Dictionary, capital O, capital E, capital D, is the one that we're talking about here. So, I do want you to look up your word in the Oxford English Dictionary and learn the history of the word. So what I recommend is, if you are local and you find yourself on campus, go to the library, The librarians are aware of this assignment that we're doing, and they would be more than happy to help you use the Oxford English Dictionary. But I recommend you go to the library, find the Oxford English Dictionary, look up your word, take a photo of it or scan or make a copy of that page so that you have it. And that will give you the entire history of your word, when it was first used, all the different meanings, etc. Depending on what your word is, it may be several pages or it may be just a little chunk. If you are not local, right, or unable to get to campus, and I mean really unable to get to campus, then you may contact me privately and let me know what your word is, and I will send you a scan of your word, okay, at my convenience. Okay, so that's the Oxford English Dictionary. There is an Oxford English Dictionary available online, but you do have to pay for it. So you're welcome to invest in a subscription to that if you'd like, and save yourself the trouble of having to come to campus. But otherwise, you will have to come and use the hard copy. Make sure my recording has not failed. Okay. So, Oxford English Dictionary plus 4 to 6 additional sources, okay, to increase your expertise about the word and help you to make your argument. So this paper is going to rely on 2 different types of sources. The first is called journalistic, and the second type of source is called an academic source. I want you to use at least 2 of each. Really what this means is I want you to find a balance of sources, right? I want you to find sources from a bunch of different places and not just all from Google or something like that. So what is the difference between these 2 different types of sources? Well, as the name suggests, a journalistic source is a source that is written by journalists and is intended for public consumption. So a journalistic source might be a newspaper, it might be a magazine, it might be a professional website, anything that you might read in a periodical, something that you might read just for fun, even if you didn't have to do it for class. That is a journalistic source, written by journalists and intended for public consumption. An academic source is a source that is written by academics or scholars or experts in the field and is intended for other academics, scholars, experts in the field, or students who are being forced to read them for their English research papers. So you're going to find journalistic sources the way you would normally find sources, right, using the internet and other such devices. Academic sources are going to be found through the library databases. And there is a link in the essay assignment folder for the research paper that has a link to the library webpage. And there are also several tutorial videos there for how to do research using those databases. If we were an on-ground class, I would take you all to the library and we would have a session with one of our librarians and we would talk about doing research. Unfortunately, because of the constraints of our online class, we do not have the opportunity to do that, but there are those tutorial videos for you to consult. And of course, you can reach out to me or the library staff with any questions. So all this is to say, I want you to find a balance of sources, right? I don't want you to find the first 4 things that come up on Google. I don't want you to find everything from the databases either. The great thing about the databases is because they are curated by Three Rivers, you know that everything in there is going to be high quality, even if you don't necessarily agree with all the author's ideas that you find. So those are the source requirements. Now, you may be asking yourself, Mr. Marvin, how the heck am I going to write a 7 to 9 page research paper about a single word? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here are some things that you might think about investigating when you do this paper. You might do some word analysis, right, where you break down the word into its different parts and figure out how the word's meaning is generated. You're definitely going to do some etymology, right, the history of the word. That's where the OED comes in. Look at the evolution of the word, the way the word has changed over time. How has this word's meaning changed between now and 2018 compared to what it meant in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s or the 60s, etc.? How do we use the word today, and how does that change over time? Are there ways that we misuse this word? Do people think they know what it means, but they don't actually know what it means? Are there abuses of this word, where people use this word in a negative or perhaps more malicious or manipulative way? Denotations are the dictionary definitions, literally what does the word mean. Connotations, as we've talked about in discussion boards, are our associated feelings and meanings that we attach to words. Right, so like Paul Robert talks about way back at the beginning of the semester, mother has a very positive connotation, generally speaking. Mother-in-law has less positive of a connotation. It's not to say that all mothers-in-law are bad or all mothers are good, just that these are the sort of feelings and the presumptions, perhaps, that we make when we think about these words. And also clarifications. Do we think the word means a certain thing, but it actually means this, right? Like that clarification that I talked about in the white privilege video that I made about what Black Lives Matter actually means compared to what people may think it means. So you just have to kind of think outside the box and think about what are the different aspects or angles into this word that I can explore. Because a word is going to be the most broad sort of topic that you could research, right? Like some of my students in my on-ground classes are doing love or respect or honor or privacy, right? These are big, huge umbrella terms. So you have to figure out what your way in is going to be. So this is where your creativity comes in, right? As always, the more broad the topic is, the more freedom you have to be creative and figure out what you want to say, but the more challenging it might be to figure that out. As we've discussed all semester, our goal is to contribute to conversation. In this case, learn the history and background of your word to educate both yourself and your reader. Research what others have said about the word and synthesize different voices to invent connections about your word. Finally, decide what you have to say about your word and argue about its role in 2018. So it's really what we've been doing all semester, right? We're learning what other people say about our topic, and then we're figuring out what we have to say about the topic. You may find information that is literally like the history of the word, right? Which is fine, and you could use that stuff. But you're also going to want to consider articles that are not about the word as a word necessarily, but the word as an idea or a concept. So for example, somebody in one of my other classes is doing privacy. So you, in that case, that student might want to detail the history, right, of the word privacy and what privacy means today as opposed to what it used to mean back in the day. But also, he found an article about privacy and online dating, right, or privacy and social media, right? So those are different contexts for the word privacy. So you want to look at your word in these different contexts. And even if the word doesn't seem to be about, even if an article doesn't seem to be about your word per se, you can still figure out different ways to use these kinds of sources. So I hope that makes sense. It really just comes down to you, as always, are responsible for thinking outside the box and figuring out how am I going to fit all these puzzle pieces, that is, ideas and sources, into my own argument about this word. As always, make sure you have a clearly defined thesis statement. Okay, again, do not confuse a research paper with a report where you just give me a bunch of information. The information has to help you to argue something about your word and what it means. You're required to use at least 4, no more than 6 sources for this paper, plus the Oxford English Dictionary. All of these sources are going to come from outside of our textbook, and you must have a works cited page and an annotated bibliography, which we'll talk about shortly. As always, see me or your syllabus for help with MLA formatting. Okay, page 2. So I go back and forth every semester about whether or not I should include this piece of paper in the assignment, and ultimately I decide to leave it in most of the time because you might be a little bit overwhelmed thinking about a 7 to 9 page paper about a single word. So because of that, I've included this sheet here just as a guide for how you might want to think about organizing this essay. You do not have to follow this. I used to teach this sort of method a little bit more prescriptively. I don't anymore because your paper should be organized in whatever way you think is best. But here's a way to kind of think about your paper and break it up into several smaller sections. So you must almost think of it as a series of smaller papers that you kind of build together into one larger essay. I'm not going to read all these to you, but you can look through it, and this may give you some ideas for how you might choose to organize this assignment. You're going to hand in one document, right, at the end of the semester. Your works cited page is going to come after your conclusion. I'm reading down here. Your works cited page will come after your conclusion, and your annotated bibliography will come behind that. You're going to keep a running page count the whole time. So your paper will be pages 1 through 7. Then your works cited page behind that, page 8, and then your annotated bibliography behind that will be pages 9 and 10, or whatever. Again, you do not have to adhere to this guide. It is just a suggestion, right, for how you might want to think about going about it, but you are not obligated to do so by any stretch of the imagination. However, your paper should be argumentative, just like we've been doing all semester. It should be thesis-driven, just like we've been doing all semester. It should use sources to back up and help you make your point, just like we've been doing all semester. 2 different kinds of sources to consider: journalistic sources, written by journalists and intended for public readers, and scholarly sources or academic sources written by scholars and intended for other experts in the field or students. And evaluate both the word itself and the discourse surrounding it. What are people saying about this word? What are all the different perspectives on it? And then what is my perspective on it? Become an expert on your topic, get a sense of the conversation, and then contribute something original to that conversation. Okie doke. Last page is the annotated bibliography. So you may be familiar with these from other classes, which is great. If you're not, don't worry about it because I'm going to explain to you exactly how to do it for this class. So what is an annotated bibliography? Well, an annotated bibliography is like a deluxe works cited page. Each MLA formatted entry is accompanied by an annotation that provides the reader with commentary about the source. In its most basic form, an annotation should include a summary and an evaluation of the source. This annotated bibliography is worth 4 points on top of the paper itself, which is worth 21, and that should bring us right up to 100 points for the end of the semester total. So we've talked about annotations before in terms of like when you read something and you annotate, you circle things, underline things, make notes in the margins, etc. This is a different kind of annotation. Okay, an annotation in this case is a short paragraph where you summarize the author's main ideas. She talks about this, then she talks about this, then she talks about this. And then you evaluate the source and you explain how useful or credible the source is going to be for you and your research and why. The annotations may also include the following: the author's qualifications. Do they have a PhD from Harvard? Right, that would make them very qualified, perhaps. Any detectable biases? Do they work at Google? That would probably make them very biased in terms of how they feel about Google. Purpose and scope of the source. The source is very, very long. I do not understand it. I'm not going to read it. The source is very, very short. Anything in between. Rhetorical appeals of the source. Does the author use ethos, logos, or pathos? And usefulness of the source as it applies to your research. So, annotations can range from brief to very detailed. The point is to concisely explain the source's main ideas and give the reader a sense of the source's quality. I recommend you aim for 5 to 8 sentences per annotation. So you'll have the usual citation, last name, first name, title of the article, etc., hanging indent, and then underneath that you'll have the annotation, 5 to 8 good sentences summarizing the source's main ideas and evaluating the source's quality. Now, you are going to do a works cited page and an annotated bibliography, so why are we doing that? I'm glad you asked. Not all entries in your annotated bibliography are going to make it into your paper and your works cited page. The annotated bibliography is a collection of all the research that you've done, whereas your works cited page includes only the sources used in your paper. So, this is one of the cardinal rules of research, which is to find more sources than you need. Just like with quotes, if you try to use the first 4 things that you find, it's going to be tough to cram those things into your paper and make it really work. On the other hand, if you think about it like going to the library, you go to the library, you look up your topic, you pull off a bunch of books off the shelf, right? And then you take all those books to the table and you flip through them and you decide which ones you're going to use and which ones you're not going to use. So the more sources you find, the more flexibility you're going to have and the more effective your paper will ultimately be. If you try to force the first 4 sources that you find into your essay, it's going to be tough going, probably. So your annotated bibliography is going to have at least 6 sources on it. Your actual paper only needs to use 4 or 5 or 6 of those sources. Rough draft of your annotated bibliography is due on Thursday the 3rd by 11:59 p.m. This is ungraded. You're going to submit that as a Word document file as usual. Your final draft should contain a minimum of 6 sources. So submitting the rough draft is just an opportunity for you to get feedback from me about your annotated bibliography in case you've never done one before, which is totally possible. It is not graded, the rough draft, and there's no penalty for not doing it. So if you feel like you don't need my advice and you're going to get a perfect score on your annotated bibliography no matter what, then that is your prerogative. Last thing I will say is that this is an example of an annotated bibliographic entry from a paper that I wrote in graduate school. So the first part right here is the citation. This is what you've been doing on your works cited pages all semester: last name, first name, title of the article, etc. So these things will be organized alphabetically, and then underneath each Citation is the annotation. So this is a short example because I wanted to fit it on one page, but you can read this here that says Blumenthal's analysis discusses the roles of the improvisational solo for each character in Toni Morrison's novel Jazz. What does that sentence do? It's a one-sentence summary of the author's main ideas. Though the concept of character soloing has validity, the article is convoluted and difficult to follow, resulting in a critique with some good ideas but poor execution. What does that sentence do? It's an evaluation of the source's usefulness. How effective or useful, helpful is it going to be for you in your research, and why? Again, this is a very short annotation. I want yours to be between 5 and 8 sentences per source. Okie dokie? So that is basically the entirety of the assignment. I'll try to wrap up the video in a moment before it gets too long. There is one other thing I would like to say, which is that Pam Williams, who is our head librarian at Three Rivers and has helped my classes out for this assignment for the past year, is available to help you do research. I could try to help you as well, but Pam and the other librarians, it is their job to help people find sources for their academic work. So I strongly encourage you to reach out to her via email if needed. Her email address is just pwilliams@threerivers.edu. The other thing I want to mention is that last semester, Pam very generously created a library guide website that has a bunch of resources and tips for this particular essay. I'm not going to waste the time in this video to bring that website up because I don't quite remember the URL, but it is linked in the research paper assignment folder. So if you click on that, that will bring you into the LibGuide website. And that page has a bunch of book recommendations that you might want to look up your word in, as well as has Pam's contact information and how to cite things from the OED. Alrighty, so this is it, the grand finale. It's really, again, a continuation of all of the skills we've been developing. It's just obviously on the largest scale that we've done so far. So if you have any questions about anything I said in this video or anything I did not say in the video, please post in course questions. It's really important that you understand the assignment to ensure that you have the best chance of doing well. All right, so great job making it this far in the semester. I hope you're enjoying the warm weather. It's getting better all the time. If you have any questions, please do get in touch. Otherwise, I will see you guys online.